Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Hey, it's great to be here again. I want to comment on something said earlier. It's amazing how fast the team set up. I came up here, there was about 6 people in the room. I realized I left my water bottle and the car went down. Came back up, it was all set up. Serious. So, I want to tell you something about this sermon here that I'm about ready to do. I spent about 4 months working on it.
Wow.
Okay. It's not a typical sermon. And I didn't do it for the first time just for 3 o'clock today.
All right.
But, you know, I'm a consultant, and I'm also kind of like Jim, I'm a nerd, you know. I'm a research guy, I was an engineer and all this, so there was a particular story in the Old Testament that was so compelling to me that I'd missed. I've been a Christian since 1981, and I just missed it. It was there all along, a huge story, and I think it'll speak to you today when it's all about God. This plot twist is so big. I want to talk to you about this just to give you a sense. There's David and Goliath, right? Big story, right? Everybody knows. You knew that story when you were 3 years old if you grew up in our church. Okay, but that story, even though it gets 18 million hits on Google, the story we're going to talk about today only gets 357,000, and is so much more inspiring than David and Goliath. David and Goliath, let me just lower inspiration level just a little bit. Because it wasn't all about God. See, if David took on Goliath, his family would never have to pay taxes. He would get a ton of money. Go back and read the story. And he would get the girl.
Right.
So that's not all about God, is it? Okay? Secondly, he had the advantage. As long as he didn't wear the clunky armor, he was spry, he could move around. Goliath could never catch up with him. Eventually, one of these stones would go into the skull. Now he was a great marksmanship. God helped him out. Boom, he nailed him the first time. But he really did have the advantage, and there's a lot of scholars that actually believe that. I do believe that. It wasn't about God as much as the story we're going to look at today. This story has the most supporting evidence of any story in the Bible. In secular history and archaeology and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
You will be amazed. It has more outside secular testimony from contemporaries than even the story of Jesus and the apostles. It has the most important lesson of all time.
All right.
It involves an evil nation with the gruesome features of Hitler's Nazi Germany and Tolkien's Mordor. Has some Braveheart-like moments. And has a plot twist greater than any of the Star Wars saga we've seen up to this point. Okay, so does anybody here know what story in the Bible I'm speaking of? A long time ago, the Assyrian warrior king Sennacherib sought to rule the entire Middle East. The city of Babylon, the regions of Phoenicia and Philistia were the first to fall during the Dark Lord's quest to conquer Egypt, Ethiopia, and beyond. Only Jerusalem, the capital city of the small nation of Judah, stood in his way when its king Hezekiah defied Sennacherib. You are invited to the story of a standoff in the summer of 701 BC that will be told and retold until the end of time. Now this is PowerPoint, but if I show this in Keynote, it scrolls up nicely like a Star Wars. But this is an amazing story. It's told in multiple chapters in Isaiah, and chapters in 2 Kings, and 2 Chronicles, and elsewhere outside the Bible. What we know about ancient Assyrians is that they were the pioneers of weaponry. So when you watch like Lord of the Rings and you see battering rams and catapults and all that stuff, they came up with it. They came up with impaling and crucifixions. They were cruel. They fought wars just for the sake of wars. A new king would come in and they would have to go out and conquer a nation just to prove they were hot stuff. They were shameless. And what they would do to bash and make people suffer just for the sake of glory in it is mind-blowing. Historians say that they are the very metric of the bottom of comparing behavior in the human race. There are no power more useless, more savage, more terrible ever cast its gigantic shadow on the pages of history as it passed on the way to ruin. And this historian goes on to describe all the things that they would do as they would tear people down, break them down, remove them, make them suffer. Just terrible. Just terrible. So that's the time of Hezekiah, 701 BC. These are the 4 kings mentioned in the Old Testament in chronological order, kings of Assyria. When King Sargon II died in a war, in a battle, it exposed the vulnerability of Assyria. And they thought, uh-oh, we're losing our power of myth. We better go out and get some victories, Sennacherib thought, his son, so that nobody will think we're weak. All 3 of the kings that preceded Sennacherib were responsible for eradicating Israel off the pages of history forever.
Wow.
What was left is a few people in Samaria that we see in the New Testament called Samaritans. They only have a faint resemblance to the people of God from the past. They so assimilated into the world. So Sennacherib comes on the scene as the mightiest person in the Old Testament, even more powerful than Pharaoh, on the opposite side of God's people. He was an amazingly intelligent person. He was an engineer. He was involved in the development of aqueduct systems. When he went to conquer Babylon, about 702 BC, I believe, Babylon was surrounded by some very thick walls, but they had a river going underneath into the city. He figured out how to reroute the river Euphrates so that the army could go up into the city. He was just that kind of a guy, very smart. Isaiah, a contemporary, is the prince of prophecy. Every prophet gets measured up to Isaiah. He's the dude. Okay? He served for almost 50 years, multiple kings, good kings, bad kings in Judah. And he was married to a prophetess. And he is the lead prophet at the time of this story. He's consulted for special prayers. He had so much value to the king's life and to Judah's life. He's a supporter of prayer, spiritual perspective provider. He gives a map of the future. He warns about alliances. He forecasts truths that happen in advance. As a contemporary of Sennacherib, he gives advice. He's an encourager. He just goes on and on the value that he adds. Hezekiah, who is the dude in this story, is called no one is like him, is what the Bible says. There was no one like him, even going back to David. No king before him or after him. If you ask a Jew today, a Jew that worships God, goes to the synagogue, knows their Old Testament, who's the greatest king in the Bible, that's a no-brainer. They'll say Hezekiah. You ask a Christian that, they'll say David.
Yeah.
We're wrong. Christians are wrong in this one. David was one of the most messed up people of the Old Testament. The thing that made him redeemable is he kept getting back up.
Come on, David.
He'd turn to the Lord, he'd open up his heart, he'd come back, but even at the end of his life, he's just shrinking again. He's going up and down, up and down. Not a good family man, the whole bit. So it is Hezekiah. And you'll see why. And he's closely linked with Isaiah. What it says about Hezekiah, as you read the story, his father Ahaz was about everything you don't want in a leader. He's weak, he's squirrely, he changes his mind, he's fearful, and he frustrated Isaiah. And then he dies, and Hezekiah, 26-year-old, becomes king. That was the best thing that ever happened to Judah in the 1,000 years before Christ. He became a unifier. He went to Israel before it was all devastated, before it was completely eradicated. He went to those people in Samaria and said, come to worship with us. Now, if you would imagine the most liberal, worldly Christian types out there that are not faithful to God, that have bad doctrine, and you said, let's have a worship service with them. Come on in. That's how radical of an idea. This is hyper-ecumenicalism. But it had the heart of God behind it. And Isaiah even forecasted before Hezekiah became king that we're going to pull the people of Israel into Zion and we're going to worship together. And we're going to walk side by side and talk about the Lord. And so Hezekiah actually makes it happen right after becoming king. The Passover that they celebrated is considered the second greatest Passover of the Old Testament. He's a bridge builder. He also is an engineer. And you'll see that he conceived or was part of conceiving a massive feat in engineering. And we'll cover that in a little bit. And Isaiah and Hezekiah were comrades. They were prayerful, courageous together, outside-the-box thinkers. They had a spiritual relationship. And they were awesome. It was an awesome team. It was confidant that Isaiah was for Hezekiah is the model. Now I want to tell you, I want to speak real truthfully as a consultant. The number one thing that goes wrong in churches where I do work is a primary leader, like an evangelist, is so autocratic and independent, does not have people in their life. And it's the pyramid. The guy at the top, he's untethered. And so I studied all the kings of Israel and all the kings of Judah. All the kings of Israel after Solomon did not have a prophet in their life. And the prophets they had in their life, they didn't listen to, or they were bad prophets. In the kings of Judah, I think there were about 18. There were 7 that were either decent or good. All 7, we know the names of the prophet or seer in their life, and they were good men, and they calibrated the king. And so we all need it, right? We need people in our life. You know what I tell churches? Every single consultation I've ever done, even with the Presbyterian church that I consulted for, I said, every prominent leader should have 3 people in their life that knows the answers to 8 questions, and I gave them the questions about family, finances, extracurricular activities, mental wellness, emotional conditions, addictions, and all that. And those 3 people ought to be able to talk to one another about you, the leader. Because so goes the leader, so goes the church. And so that all came out of the Bible. The idea. Now, here's the domain. This vast area up there is Assyria. And the Assyrians were to come down into Egypt and to Ethiopia. And this is such a major event. It's like a first real world war. And look who's in the way. Jerusalem. So you just don't want to come on. This is probably a desert area here, so you've got to come down this way. The Syrians could go around Jerusalem, or they could take on Jerusalem on the way. There's no king that's glorious and prideful that's going to avoid Jerusalem. They want to get credit for taking Jerusalem out as well. We have here Judah, which has 47 cities. At the end of this story today, only one is standing. The others are decimated. They're gone. They're gone. Super significant what's happened here. Prior to Hezekiah's reign at age 26, they hardly have any scriptures in Jerusalem. Because the annals, the records, the chronicles were up in the northern kingdom, Israel and Samaria. When they reached out to the northern kingdom, Israel, they got our Old Testament. They got our Proverbs. And so now, all of our Old Testament that's written up to this point are now in Jerusalem. So if we lost all 47 cities, the world might have lost Scripture. And Scripture is the core to the Western civilization's justice systems. Going back to Moses, if you want to talk about the fair treatment of people and the use of witnesses and evidences and innocent until proven guilty and sanctuary, it all comes from the Bible. Amen. So this is an important story. The room in the back here from these images is the British Museum. And I've been in there about 4 or 5 times. The reliefs along the wall is the telling of one of these battles in Judea from the perspective of the Assyrians. It fills a room. It's a pretty significant sized room. This scroll off to the right is Prism. It's about this big, the Sennacherib Prism. There's 3 of them. One's in the Israeli Museum, one's in the British Museum, and one's in the Oriental Institute in Chicago. To be able to read it, first of all, you have to be able to read Sanskrit, and you need a magnifying glass. It tells the story through Sennacherib's eyes of the battle with Jerusalem, specifically Hezekiah. The other writings here are contemporary writings, Isaiah scroll, Herodotus, and other writings from other nations. This was an important story. It's like the first world event. So everybody's watching it because the implications are great. It's like 9/11. Somebody could say, yeah, only 2,900 people died. It wasn't like a world war yet. But the implications were so massive of what was going on 9/11 that it affected the watching world. Jerusalem, I said before, was the last standing city between Assyria, Egypt, and Babylon. The Assyrians went to Babylon first, then span around the Middle East and came all the way down and wanted to go to Egypt and North Africa. At this particular time, a lot of refugees are coming to Jerusalem to say, this is what happened in my city, watch out. People from Israel that's already been decimated are coming to Jerusalem. Let me tell you what Sennacherib does. This is horrible. And to describe what happens from the stories of history, we couldn't talk about it on a Sunday at church service. It's that gross and inappropriate.
Wow.
As Jerusalem is figuring out it's the next target, people are partying or doing other things that are distracting. Partying because they think if we just get drunk, we're going to die tomorrow. Let's go out, medicating our pain. Other people prayed or did reinforcements of the wall of the city, just thinking they could stem off the Assyrians. And there was a lot of tension about what to do. There was tension even between Isaiah and Hezekiah. Everybody had a different theory about what to do. I took all 3 prophets that tell this, give warnings to Hezekiah, Hosea, who's now deceased by about 10 years, Micah up here, and Isaiah, an older guy, and I put it into one scripture. The whirlwind that brings disaster will bring invaders all the way to Zion's gates. You will also be rubble unless you accept Yahweh's plans to purge the territory from corrupt seers, prophets, and leaders, and from idolatry of the people. Therefore, Judah, step away from Israel's snares, or terror will overtake you. Judah, Yahweh will judge you. Jerusalem, if you worship him and welcome the remnant to Jerusalem, embrace justice, and are the guardians of the law, then the Assyrians will come no further than your gate. He will save you not by bow, sword, battle, or by horses and horsemen. So this is what the prophets are trying to get through to Judah, mostly to Hezekiah. The pressure's on him because it all comes down to this one person. Now this is the greatest dilemma that they had with Sennacherib, obviously, but there were different vantage points in it. We have the people weighing in from different roles. This is the greatest dilemma in the world, but you know what? The Metro LA ministry is in a little dilemma too.
Yeah.
We've got 3 teams, A, B, and C, right now, looking at the organizing, unifying principles of all 6 sectors, and what kind of leadership culture do we want across the 6 sectors? What kind of leader would be wanted across the 6 sectors? And the team A is the task force that's been helping over the last 5 months. Ron Quint, Pedro Garcia, Jerry Sugarman, Raphael Lewis, Steve Marici. They are the tie-in to the greater LA church. Team B is your staff, your elders in training, and so forth. These are what I call legacy leaders. These are people that have been behind the scenes in the machinations of the region over a period of time. And Team C was selected through a survey process. And here in the skyline, you see your representatives. They're great to have on this team, my goodness. And what we're going to do, we've had one meeting last Thursday night. We have another one tonight, and then we'll have another one this week. This third one will be hand-selecting people from within each of the sectors to invite in to be part of the sounding board process. By the time it's all over, there'll be opportunities for more and more people to weigh in on the discussion that we're having. That discussion follows collaboration methodology. I just got a book that came out last week that's subtitled Collaborating on Audacious Undertakings. Now, it's a secular book for my secular consulting, but collaborating in the kingdom is a lot more fun.
Amen.
And so here's a chance for us to figure out how we can have a both-and world of the good that we see in the 6 sectors, but also be better tied in with the greater LA church, and to make sure there's equity in the region, that we don't have an alpha ministry and a zeta ministry, but we're all alpha ministries, you know, things like that. So I'm looking forward to seeing how this will develop. We're not promising deadlines on things. We're just moving the needle, letting God show us the way.
Amen.
Back to Hezekiah. He had 3 options that we can see: resist and fight, or just surrender, or negotiate a surrender. Now, historically, negotiations don't work well. Not during this period. So really, it just doesn't look like there's that many options. But there is a 4th option in the mix. It's just not clear yet. Not up at this point. Meanwhile, see this tunnel here?
Yeah.
It was built, started being built 5 years before this. Hezekiah could see in advance. And its purpose, it's called Hezekiah's Tunnel, the purpose of it was to build a way for the water from a nearby spring to come into the city walls of Jerusalem. They would block all access to that spring and cover it up and bury it outside of the walls, so that when their enemies would come, they would get thirsty real quick. And there was no water around. And there literally be no water around. So it was a smart idea. It took about 5 years to build it, 1,740 feet long. They started on one end and another and knock through the stone until they eventually found each other. We're only off by about 11 inches. It matched right in the middle. There's a plaque there that they wrote that described the process when they were done. And they did a good job, but here's God's view of it. God's not so fired up about the tunnel. Oh, Yahweh stripped away the defenses of Judah. And you looked in that day to the weapons in the palace of the forest. You saw the walls of the city David were broken through in many places. You stored up water in the lower pool. You counted the buildings in Jerusalem and tore down houses to strengthen the wall. You built a reservoir between the 2 walls for the water of the old pool. But you did not look to the one who made it, or regard the one who planned it long ago. So you're all caught up in your plans, but you're not looking to me.
Come on.
Sometimes we just get so busy.
Yeah.
Just work, methodology, create new study series, new techniques, new methods, try harder, get up earlier, read more books. And sometimes we do everything but turn to the Lord.
Amen.
So Hezekiah has a Braveheart moment. Now, Sennacherib has devastated the 46 cities and is on his way and has sent a messenger in front of him to negotiate with Hezekiah. Like, just let us come on in and it'll go better for you. But Hezekiah says to the people, be strong, be brave, don't be afraid, don't lose hope. The king of Assyria has a huge army with him. Yes, sure. But there's a great power with us than there is with him. The only thing he has is human strength. But Yahweh, our God, is with us. He will help us. He will fight our battles. This is you can hear the music right now, you know. This is a Mel Gibson kind of a film moment, you know, right? It was pretty powerful, but you know what? He wobbled right after this. Because more and more people came to Jerusalem and shared scary survival stories. And so the thing he does next is kind of embarrassing. And some of these survival stories are consistent with what we find on the Sennacherib. All the things that he does, people, the gullets and entrails run down the wide earth, the innards of people. My prancing steeds, harnessed for my riding, plunged into the streams of their blood as into a river. The wheels of my war chariot, which brings low the wicked and the evil, were besplattered with the filth of blood. 150,000 of their warriors I cut down with the sword. Braggadocious he was. And so these stories are coming in, and Hezekiah gets afraid, and he says, I've done wrong. He says this to the messenger. Withdraw from me, and I'll pay whatever you demand. So Hezekiah emptied the temple of his gold and his other treasures and gave it to the commander and say, hey, we don't have any beef with you. Go ahead and go around us. Go ahead and take North Africa. And by the way, we can be a vassal state, you know, be a servant state to Assyria. That's what this is communicating at this moment. It was a really, really weak moment of Hezekiah. It didn't last very long, partly because the Assyrians had a major miscalculation. I'm not going to read it real closely, but what they did, the messenger said a number of things. Don't depend on Hezekiah. Don't rebel against the king of Assyria. You guys are weak. Don't depend on Egypt. Nobody has ever made it who's resisted us. We've got it covered. Hear the word of the great king, or the king of Assyria. This is what the king says. Do not let Hezekiah deceive you. ... Choose life, not death. And then the administrator, the secretary, and the recorder went to Hezekiah and reported these warnings. But the braggadociousness of this representative of Hezekiah is a little bit out of control. He's speaking in Hebrew. So he's speaking the language that people can hear inside the city walls. Just as the gods of the people of the other lands did not rescue their people from my hand, so the God of Hezekiah will not rescue his people from my hand. And then the scriptures say, and he continued with this, ridiculing the Lord, 2 Kings 18. They spoke about the God of Jerusalem as they did about the gods of other peoples of the world, the work of human hands. Now, I need to explain something to you so you get the significance. When you look at your NIV and you see the capital word L-O-R-D, have you ever noticed that? Yeah. The Hebrew word behind that is a word that's either translated Jehovah or Yahweh. The Hebrew language does not have vowels, so you don't know if the 4 letters represent 2 or 3 syllables. When the people of Judah were around pagans, they would never say the name of God out loud. They'd never say Yahweh. So they would use a Hebrew word for Lord. So the NIV has really carried on that custom when you're reading the Old Testament. Don't say the name of God out loud, which is Yahweh. Well, it just so happened that this Assyrian commander is using the name Yahweh in the Hebrew language and saying bad things about him. He had no idea that that changed the game. It changed the game. Because you now no longer think about yourself. You think about the Lord. See, it's all about God. Yeah. Here's Hezekiah's new prayer. The Lord who rules over all, you are the God of Israel. You sit on your throne between the cherubim. You alone are God of the kingdoms of the earth. You have made heaven and earth. Listen, Yahweh, hear us. Open your eyes. Yahweh, look at the trouble we're in. Listen to what Sennacherib is saying. You are the living God, and he dares to make fun of you. And this is like fighting language. Now what's happened is Hezekiah and these 3 others who are listening as you look close at the story, and Isaiah, they're no longer thinking about the safety of Judah. They're ticked. They are lathered up in indignation for the right reasons. You know, just every once in a while, it's just right to be offended. Some things so cross a line, you say, that is unacceptable. And you put it all on the line. That's what a core value is, by the way. That by which you will lose everything over. I've told this story a few times here, so if you've heard me say it before, I apologize. But there's the CEO of Southwest Airlines about 10, 15 years ago got a letter from a woman that said, I don't like the fact that the steward was telling jokes all my whole flight, trying to make us laugh. I did not like that. The CEO sent a letter to the woman and said, we'll miss you. In other words, that's a core value. We're not giving us up. That's what we try to do. Now, at a much more serious level, you don't mess with the name of God. And so these men no longer were thinking about their survival. And that's the good thing. We shouldn't be thinking about our reputation, our comfort, our feelings, our ideas, our philosophies, our methods. anywhere near in the same category that we think about God. We've got to make it all about God. And when we wonder whether we should get open with our life, or whether we should flirt with that coworker, or whatever it is, just make it all about God and the issue is settled. Amen. A lot of things would be settled if we would do that. Well, what happens when you have a prayer like this? And by the way, he also prayed with Hezekiah, or Isaiah. Here's what happens. King Hezekiah and the prophet Isaiah, son of Amos, cried out in prayer to heaven about this, and the Lord sent an angel who annihilated the fighting men and the commanders and the officers in the camp of the Assyrian king. Wow. The angel of the Lord went out and put to death 185,000 in the Assyrian camp. When the people got up the next morning, there were all the dead bodies. This is just not a fanciful story. This is supported by secular history. The battle stops. It was over. And now there are variations as to how these men died. Some say, well, maybe there was food poisoning. Maybe there were poisonous mice who were carrying diseases. Maybe they're right. Maybe that's what the angel of the Lord did, right? Yeah. Doesn't matter what he used. It happened. That's the point. And guess what? Sennacherib did not go down into Egypt and Ethiopia. It stopped right there and he hightailed back out. Because you rage against me, says the Lord, and because of your insolence has reached my ears, I put my hook in your nose, my bit in your mouth, and I made you return by the way you came. This is the worst thing that could happen to a prideful, arrogant ruler. I think we live in times where some of the people that lead major nations on this earth are close to crossing some lines. Yeah. Well, scary business. Scary business. But he has to save face. As to Hezekiah the Jew, who did not submit to my yoke, I laid siege to 46 cities. Himself I made a prisoner in Jerusalem, his royal residence, like a bird in a cage. But you didn't get him. And your army died at their front door. Tell the rest of the story. Of course he didn't. But here is the rest of the story. So he withdrew to his land in disgrace, and he went to the temple of his God. Some of his sons, his own flesh and blood, cut him down with the sword. Confirmed in history. Hezekiah trusted in the Lord, the God of Israel. There's no one like him among all the kings of Judah, either before him or after him. That's the last word of this story. Pretty powerful stuff, huh? Yeah. It's great for us. Two closing quotes from secular history. With the hindsight of 2,700 years, we can see that Sennacherib's campaign to Judah was a fateful moment in history. Had he demolished Jerusalem, or even deported its inhabitants, that would have been the end of the state of Judah. And the resulting world would bear little resemblance to our own. Another secular historian said, had the Assyrian army remained healthy in 701, it didn't, obviously, Jerusalem probably would have been captured and the people dispersed, as had happened to Samaria only 20 years before. Think of what that would mean. The world as we know it becomes unrecognizable, profoundly, utterly different. Surely there's no greater might have been in all recorded history. I think there's a message in here for us. There's a might have been for each of us as individuals. We either let the God who saved Jerusalem work in our life, or we don't. Yeah. Or we make our lives about God, all about God, or we don't. Mm-hmm. What is your life a testament to? Is one or the other? We falter. Hezekiah faltered, and you will falter again. But you got to get back up. You got to get recalibrated. Yeah. Let the prophets into your life. And then make sure it's all about God, right? All right. When the Lord's honor stirred Hezekiah, Isaiah, and the officials of Judah, the city was rescued. But his breakthrough did not occur until they realized it was about God. I want you to think about Jesus today. The greatest king of Judah prevailed against a superpower. The King of Kings prevailed against a greater enemy, death. There's a lot similar to Jesus and Hezekiah at his high moment. When Jesus was hanging on the cross, he scorned the shame. That means he ignored the noise. This is all about God. I'm not impressed with you people. You Pilate, Herod, whatever. This is bigger than anything else that's going on right now. I'm going to make it all about my Father. And we can learn from their example. Thank you very much.